Hello, everyone. This is Lisa. I am the publisher and CEO of the Goodman Project. I'm going to kick off the Writers' Hour here on this call. The way this will work is that I'm going to spend about 20 minutes talking about one specific aspect of writing. Today it's going to be show versus tell, which is kind of an old truism. If you studied writing or taking any classes in it or watched videos on writing, like this show versus tell comes up a lot. And then after that, then we'll have a question and answer where you can ask questions about anything writing related, anything promotional related, anything how the structure of GMP works. Like you can really, the question and answer is not just about what I've talked about, but is about anything that would be helpful to you personally. And then what we might do is do a little group brainstorm on some things that we could all write about together. So before I start, let me just see who just joined. Hi, who just joined?
Tom Pfeiffer.
Oh, Tom Pfeiffer. Awesome to hear your voice.
You too, Lisa.
This is Lisa, and we have JR and Thaddeus on the call, and I was just about to get started with my show versus tell piece of the program, and then we'll open it up to questions after that.
Great.
So when we talk about showing versus telling, this is like one of those rules that comes up in writing. And you hear it so often that you think, oh, my God, I have to do this all the time. Like, telling is a bad thing. And I want to start by saying telling is not necessarily a bad thing. You don't want to overuse show versus tell. Like, sometimes you just want to explain things, and that's fine. So it's not so much a rule as a guideline. And it's an especially good guideline if you are trying to figure out how to get your writing to the next level. Like if you've been writing for a while and you understand the basics and you feel like you have an audience, but you really want to figure out how to get things even better than they are with your writing, thinking about this show versus tell and understanding it is a really good way to do that. So what do I mean by show versus tell? Well, showing versus tell is a way to be more specific in your writing. And I really like specificity as just an overall framework for thinking about my writing and how to make it better. So sometimes you're writing in a way that's just not interesting, which is sort of the cardinal rule of any kind of writing. It's be interesting. And one of the reasons you're not interesting is because you're not painting pictures with words. So you lose the reader because they can't visualize in their mind when you're talking, they don't have a clear picture in their mind. They don't have a clear visual. And if you can paint pictures with words, then you're way more likely to hold on to the reader as they're reading what you've written. Sometimes it's that the structure of your sentences just isn't as good as it can be. So maybe you're using a lot of to-be verbs. Maybe you're talking in the passive voice. Maybe you're just not using the best verbs or the best nouns, or you're using too many adjectives or adverbs. So sometimes it's more of a sentence structure problem. And sometimes it's because you're trying to describe really abstract concepts. So that might be things like emotions or ideas or ideology or social issues. Like one example that comes up over and over is when we start using the word privilege, right? Like if we just start saying, oh, your privilege is showing, and people are like, my privilege is not showing. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see it. And so what we want to do is we want to get people to see things, even if they're really abstract concepts. So I'm going to use examples from all different types of writing. One of the things that I felt that has really helped me become a better writer is to write in a bunch of different forms, like not just write blog articles or not just write books, but to really study how every kind of compelling writing works. So that might be nonfiction, that's screenwriting, that's books, that's poetry, it's stand-up comedy, it's live storytelling, it's even instruction manuals. And I'm going to start with instruction manuals because I think instruction manuals are actually an understated art form. And I would actually encourage anyone who wants to get better at their writing it doesn't even have to be an instruction manual per se, but to try to write out instructions to people in a step-by-step manner. Because when you're writing an instruction manual, you actually need a lot of empathy. Because it's not enough to just explain something to someone, but you have to put yourself in that person's place of someone who doesn't know this thing that you're trying to explain. You can't just explain something in a way where you already know how to do it, so, it's easy for you to explain it. You have to put yourself in the place of someone who does not know what you're talking about. And you have to get them to be there and paint a visual of the path that they need to follow so that they can do something at the end of it. So writing instruction manuals is actually a great way to think about showing versus telling. So I'm going to start with some really basic examples of this show, don't tell thing, right? So if you go on YouTube and you look for videos of show, don't tell, they start out with this idea of instead of saying she was angry, that you really want to describe what that anger looks like, right? So maybe it's that her cheeks turned red and her eyebrows narrowed, or she clenched her fists and jammed them into the side, or she growled at me through clenched teeth. So you have either physical descriptions of their face or their body language, or you have the sounds that they're making. So one of the things to know about showing versus telling is that when you're showing something, you want to actually use all the senses. So you want to use, what does it look like visually? What does it sound like? What does it, smell or taste or feel like tactily? Like whatever you can do to make it a sensory experience instead of an abstract one helps to show something versus tell something. So here's another couple of examples of sort of the obvious ways of showing versus telling. So instead of saying the man was stressed, say the man was fidgeting and biting his nails. Instead of saying the room was messy, say there was a leftover pizza and dirty clothes strewn over the floor. Instead of saying the woman was confident, say she strode into the room and everyone looked at her. Instead of saying the boy was careful, say he placed his socks in the top drawer of his dresser. So those are all ways in which you can take a relatively not that interesting sentence and simply by adding more specificity, you show versus tell and you make your writing more interesting. But you can even go beyond that, and instead of just describing the person, you can turn something like an emotion into action. And this is what we learn in screenwriting all the time, and this is why I love learning about writing through different mediums. So what's interesting about screenwriting, and I didn't know this before I started really studying it, is that every single scene you want to start with one emotion and end with another. So if a scene starts with someone being angry, you end with them being happy. If the scene starts with them being sad, you might end with them being confident. And you can't just say, oh, the character was happy, the character was sad. You have to turn those emotions into action. So instead of saying he walked out of the house angrily, you have to say he tripped over the newspaper on the front walk and then hurled it at the car. So you're taking an emotion and turning it into action. And then at the end of that scene, you have to do that same thing with a different emotion. And the reason when you watch a movie, you have what feels like this emotional roller coaster is because the screenwriters are manipulating you into that. They're doing that by not just hoping they can tell a story that will resonate with you emotionally. They're actually bringing through these actions that change scene by scene. And that's why you get that emotional resonance with a screenplay. Here's another example of show versus telling, right? So one of the things, and this is whether it's in novels or screenwriting or whatever, is that you want to actually think about every sentence you write. I talk about this in the advanced writing class where, the secret to being a great writer is that you really have to love sentences. And you have to love sentences so much that you really look at every sentence to see whether it's doing the job you want it to. So you might have a sentence like, she was a redhead. And that's, kind of a description, right? It's a description, but it doesn't really do anything. It just sits there on the page. And one of the things that we talk about is, well, can you take that same sentence and make it tell something about a character's personality? Can you make it advance the plot in somehow? Can you have it give a sense of story? And so if you took that sentence and used the same exact number of words, and instead of saying she was a redhead, say, man, I hate redheads. Well, now all of a sudden you're introducing a character in there, and you're introducing a character that's kind of an unsympathetic character, right? Because if somebody hates someone just because they're a redhead, then they must be a superficial jerk. And you're establishing conflict between characters. You're adding emotion into that sentence. So the same number of words is all of a sudden doing way more than just describing a redhead. Another example of how you can get character and plot and theme and cultural background into just a simple description is there's a guy, Brandon Sanderson, who writes a lot of fantasy novels and does a lot of world building and teaches lectures at Brigham Young University. And he has a great way of talking about this. He says, here's an exercise. Can you get character and plot and theme and cultural background just in how you describe a half glass of water? Right? So a glass of water is sitting on a counter. How can you get character and background and description and plot and theme all in that? Well, instead of saying, yes, there was a half-empty glass of water sat on the counter, and this was in a country that had been suffering from a drought for a long time, and everyone had to be really careful with the water. That's like a very telling way of describing what's going on. But if you just say, I told Jason not to waste water like that, didn't he learn anything from me about our land? Then you're getting character, you're getting plot, you're getting conflict, you're getting cultural background, you're getting the fact that this is in a land where water's as precious as gold. So a few other tricks that I've learned in some other writing ways. One that I learned from stand-up and improv classes is to take a really specific noun and have that be the end of the sentence. Like always put the punchline at the end of the sentence. And you can even just make your writing better by saying, is it ending with this really specific noun? So I'm ending the sentence with the visual that I want for the person. So instead of saying something like, I know, we'll have eggplant for supper, and then I went to the store and I got some. If you change that sentence to, I jogged to the farmer's market to find a few good eggplant, all of a sudden it's like better because it's more specific, because you have this story in that one sentence and you're ending with a very specific noun which stays with the reader instead of going off into generic land. And so even when you're writing nonfiction, you should kind of think about plot. So plot implies a causality in what you're talking about. And you can structure even just a blog post in terms of thinking about plot and thinking about causality, so you're really setting up an argument. So the difference between a story and a plot is this is a classic example. A story might be the queen died and then the king died, right? That's a story. But the queen died and then the king died of a broken heart, that's a plot. So just to kind of recap this, we're at the end of the 20-minute mark here, just right on time. So to recap some of the showing versus telling, you want to be really specific. You want to try and have that specificity come through all of the senses. You want to avoid large description of abstract concepts. You want to use very specific nouns and verbs, and you want to put the best nouns at the end of the sentence, kind of like a punchline. And you want to think about how your events as they unfold in your post, you want to think about the causality of those events. I know you all, as writers, so I know you all do that, but hopefully some of the specific examples of showing versus telling was helpful to you all. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Again, the questions can be about anything I just talked about or any questions about anything at all about how to help you with your writing. And it doesn't matter if it's for GOP, it doesn't matter if it's for anything else. We can talk about anything at all writing related that will be most helpful to you. So with that, I'm going to open it up.
All right. Well, Lisa, I've told people many times, and I've told myself many times that, you write like people are stupid, and by that I mean that they don't know a thing about what you're talking about, so you've got to really paint a picture for them. I mean, you've got to paint the whole picture for them. Exactly. And it's not, you don't want to, so stupid is maybe not. No, that's not the best word, but that's what I've said in the past. But I've explained it as you just need to make it like your audience doesn't know a thing about what you're talking about. Right. And I think I think a piece of it is that they don't know. You are the only one that knows the world from your point of view. And I think that's right. What's great. That's what you bring to the party. That's what makes what you're writing about special and unique and different is that nobody has exactly your point of view. So understanding that and understanding that people aren't coming from the same framework, I mean, you're totally on the right track, JR. I'm not negating what you just said.
No.
I just want to add.
That's not the best word, but I mean, it's what I've said in the past.
Right. It's like that scene from the movie My Cousin Vinny, right? It's that great scene in the courtroom where he goes, "Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old."
Exactly.
And so you don't want to do quite that. Like that's the oversimplification of it. But you do want, and that's why I started out with that example of the instruction manual, right? You have to empathize with the person who doesn't know how to do this thing you're about to explain. You have to you have to put yourself in their shoes and take away the things that you know and say, okay, how do I explain it in a way that doesn't just make sense to me, but would make sense to anyone?
Yep.
And Tom Pfeiffer and Thaddeus, you are both masters at this in different kinds of ways. You're both very, very articulate and can take these really abstract concepts that people haven't thought about before and explain them in a way where people are like, oh my God, I never thought of that before. Why hadn't I seen this before? And that's really the reaction you want people to get. You want people to get that, wow, I never saw the world the way that these people are now explaining it to me. So you guys both, I don't know whether it's through years of practice or just if you have an intuitive sense for it, but that's something that both of you are really, really strong at. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here.
Well, this is Tom and Lisa. First of all, thank you for saying that. One of the things that has helped me in my writing to make, I guess, sort of abstract concepts or other worlds relatable to people is metaphor, and it's tapping into a feeling, as opposed to a description of something. So, for example, in an article about emotional withholding, where somebody's shutting someone out and making that person feel completely closed off from their life. I think one of the metaphors I used was, you feel like you're locked in the meat locker, in the freezer. You feel frozen out. So what that does is, rather than saying pain or disconnection or, whatever the more intellectual description of the feeling would be, it's a more visceral description of the feeling, so that somebody can say, oh my God, yeah, I'm shivering, I feel that sense of coldness, so that even though you're not literally cold when someone is freezing you out emotionally that way, that kind of gets in touch with the feeling. So if you can, if as a writer you're trying to make something relatable and you can dip into, well, how did that make me feel, as opposed to how would I describe it, dictionary definition type of thing. That's one way to make the experience relatable and have an impact for the reader.
Yeah, that's a great point. That, the idea of metaphors, that's the thing that I didn't touch on that I've studied a lot is poetry. And I think that's where learning about poetry is sort of filtered into many of my other different types of writing. It's this idea of how do you take something visually and have it represent something. So I love that idea of the freezing cold meat locker when someone's shutting you out emotionally, because it it works on multiple levels, right? So you have that freezing, you have that shivering, shaking, that visceral reaction, but you also have that feeling of isolation, of truly being shut out, of truly having this barrier between you and the other person, this physical barrier that you can't get out, can't get through. So that's like a really great metaphor, and I think that speaks to, not just necessarily using the first most obvious metaphor you can think of, but really trying to put yourself in that position of what does it really feel like, and how can I have a different type of metaphor which someone hasn't heard before, so it's not just a stereotypical way of thinking about that feeling. So that was a great example.
Yeah, Lisa, this is JR. I got to get going. I could only stay for a half hour, but I really liked the stuff that you shared, and I'm gonna work on the training manual thing this week. That was a great tip.
Great. Thanks, JR.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.
Lisa, I think your point about poetry is an excellent one as well, because given the format of a post, which usually isn't longer than 750 words or whatever the average length is, we do need to condense what we're saying. It's not like a long form article in the Atlantic or the New Yorker or something like that, or even a 2,000, 2,500 word piece. So studying poetry does teach you how to compress and how to say things and evoke things in fewer words or in certain phrases. So I can definitely see how that would help a lot with post writing.
Yeah, thanks. And I think poetry is kind of this misunderstood art form. Like people sometimes use it as a way to hide bad writing. So they write something that's not that great, and then they say, oh, I know, I'll just make it rhyme and make it into a poem, and then I don't really have to figure it out. And that's sort of the opposite of what we want really good poetry to do, which, as you say, is to compress the number of words, to use metaphors, to use visuals, to get people to really transcend what they're saying in some way, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to put a few rhymes in it and call it a poem, and then get out without thinking about it too much. So.
Yeah, well, think about Walt Whitman's elegy for Lincoln, "O Captain, my Captain." The idea that the ship no longer has a captain, and so again, that's using that metaphor, but also getting at how the nation, or a good chunk of the nation, must have felt at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we could use a little more Whitman in these days and that.
Well, one thought I guess I'll add here that's been on my mind and kind of pulls it into the political spectrum is that it strikes me that nearly any attempt to counteract or argue against the Trumpian political machine, any attempt to use logic, any attempt to point out hypocrisy or lies or all of that generally falls flat, because the appeal of what's being put out there to the people who support it is how it makes them feel. And so they don't really care if he's lying. They don't really care if he's a hypocrite. They're not nearly as concerned about that because the candy that they're eating feels so good. So taking that to the next step would be to counter that, to come up with your counter to that. You have to operate on the same level. You have to somehow make people feel different when they taste that candy. You have to make them feel a sense of revulsion or a sense of, oh my God, how could I be eating this, or whatever it is. So rather than, you're being lied to.
Yeah, I'd love to explore that more for a minute, because I've been thinking about the same thing, but I have yet to figure out the answer to it. So it's almost like, your point is great. It's like, okay, so there's this real emotional level, but it's based on lies. So now, how do we get that same emotion without it being based on lies, and get people to care about that? So that was an interesting thought. How do we get them to feel revulsion instead of excitement? But I don't know. I don't know if at the core when someone wants to believe the lies, is there a way to get them to switch from that? I just don't know.
I don't know either.
No. Let me save you the time. You cannot convince a person who is invested in a lie, who has chosen to accept that lie rather than deal with the reasonable aspect that they might be wrong, to change their mind. Unfortunately, what usually happens is things have to self-destruct, that things have to burn to the ground, that an atrocity must take place before they look at themselves and ask, have we gone too far? It's almost never reason that changes their mind. It is an event of catastrophic proportions that makes them look up and say, have we done too much? Have we backed the wrong horse? But usually, reason cannot change the mind of the person who's emotionally invested in a thing. So your only other option is to be, in some way or other, able to convince them emotionally the same way they were convinced, emotionally in a positive fashion, the same way they were convinced emotionally in a negative fashion. And the problem with that is that most of those people can't be reached with the thing, with a counter to a thing that they have accepted as true. As a person of color, for example, I am inferior in many of their eyes. There is no way you can convince them using reason that I will ever be equal to them, no matter what I do, no matter what feats I accomplish, no matter how I change society. Because in their minds, the rhetoric that has been built for them all of their lives says that he is black, therefore he is less. Because if he is more, then I am less. And by definition, neither of those have to be true, but it's been made that way so long, they cannot navigate their way past this now inherent cognitive bias.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think you and Tom are in some ways saying the same thing, that there's got to be some emotional appeal that somehow flips the original emotional appeal, or either flips it or is just as positive, but positive in a different way. But the problem with hoping for a catastrophic event is that doesn't even seem to touch these people. It's like
they haven't had a catastrophic event. What event do you think has been catastrophic enough for them to change their mind? Every event that's happened so far has only gone to further their belief that Donald Trump is right. Because remember, he is painting the narrative. They aren't migrants trying to find a better life. They're a caravan invading the United States. They aren't people who are worthy of respect. No, they're undermining your well-being and your society as you know it. Your way of life is ending. Do you understand what I'm saying? He is changing the narrative to suit his bias and the base that he works from. And fear is what they live for. So unless you can make them unafraid, which is very difficult when there's a fear machine 24 hours a day stoking that fear, keeping them afraid, making them fear for their very existence. As long as that's the case, you cannot change their minds because they don't even use their minds. All they have is their emotions.
But it's not even just the fear. Like the fear is half of the equation. But what I see also, it's like these the people who have been who feel as if they've been economically disenfranchised for years, right? So these people who won't accept that the world's changing, they won't get new skills, they just think, things are, the economy's bad, it's all other people's fault. Well, the fact that Donald Trump just comes in and basically lies to them and says, okay, now the economy is going to get better, even in the face of the economy not getting better, the lies that everything is getting better economically are still out there all the time. And these people are buying it because they want to believe it, right? It's like the woman who buys the skin cream that's going to get rid of all her wrinkles. The woman who buys the skin cream that's going to get rid of all the wrinkles, and she pays $100 for it and brings it home and doesn't get rid of all the wrinkles. And then she says, well, I should have bought the $150 wrinkle cream instead. Like, that was my only mistake, Like, these people are buying the fact that the economy is getting better, even in the face of evidence that's saying it's not. So it's not just the fear, it's the promise of this better land.
But you assume that they're hearing this information that the economy is not getting better. If you watch Fox News, the one thing they never talk about is the economy getting better. They talk about it in a way that doesn't ever actually say that it isn't. They spin it so that there's no real conversation about the economy directly. It's indirect. And they find ways of taking facts and turning them into alternative facts that are not true, but because they've presented them. See, you have to remember the bias with the people who are watching these things is that they believe no matter what, whether it be true or false, they believe. So they're not aware of the facts. They don't watch other news. They don't get other information resources. They don't read Fortune. They don't read Forbes. So they don't see any information different than what is presented to them by Fox. Therefore, they don't know. And thus pretty much all of what they're seeing is built in and on a lie. So you can't get there.
Yeah, but even if they had access to that other information, I think that I hate to say brilliance, but the brilliance of the way Trump has shifted the narrative is that it is built on a grain of truth. These people do feel victimized. They do feel disenfranchised. And so, when he asks them, have your wages gone up or has this improved or whatever, there is a grain of truth in the fact that for many of them, their situation has not specifically improved. I mean, the reasons why, the positioning themselves as victims and all of that and blaming it on the other, and if we just get rid of the other, then we'll solve our problems, that's all wrong. That's all baloney. But what he's found is their vulnerability, the same way as Lisa was saying, the lady with the wrinkle cream. It's like the salesman comes around, do you hate your wrinkles? Well, of course I hate my wrinkles. I'd love to get rid of my wrinkles. Okay, well, here's the panacea for your wrinkles. So, I think it's important on the one hand to recognize that some of the feelings that these people have, while they're based on, they're not built on a very strong foundation, that they do actually feel that way, or he wouldn't be able to influence them.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. The question is, how do you shift
it? So how do we take a rape victim? Yeah. Yeah. How do we take a person who has been victimized, or who feels victimized, who feels like he or she is the victim in the equation, and substitute empowerment? How do we make that person feel empowered? How do we make that person feel, well, it really wasn't your fault, or if you shift your perspective or you look at this in a different way, you can feel differently. I mean, obviously, half the country's not going to go through years of therapy, but, how does one shift an entire mentality? I don't know.
You don't. You can't. Not the way you're hoping. You're hoping to be able to have them wake up one day and be reasonable. I'm going to tell you a secret. It doesn't happen that way. I'm a black person in America. All the things that they claim they're struggling from and dealing with, I have lived with my entire life. Disenfranchisement, I eat it every day for breakfast. A lack of opportunity, it is my bed partner. I wake up to it. I go to bed to it. To a society that is actively trying to disenfranchise me, every day. To a society that might kill me because I simply exist, it is a birthmark. It is all around me. It is everything I deal with all the time. So I don't feel a lot of sympathy for them, because the bed they lie in was created by people who sought to use them, who sought to propel a perspective in society that said being white was all it took to have access to the best. They did not get it. Society then turned around and said, well, you weren't successful. It isn't because they don't work hard, because some of the hardest working people in America are poor people. But they aren't successful because the system isn't designed for them to be successful. Someone must lose, and the way the system is built, it's built on the idea that 80% of us lose, and only 1% of us wins. And that little 19% in between, those guys are doing okay. They're not. You don't hear them screaming or crying because they're making enough money to get by. So you can't fix the problem because the problem is endemic to the society we live in. The only way to fix the problem is for them to be able to acknowledge that they have been taken advantage of, which they will never do. And as a result, some will eventually figure it out if they're exposed to alternative viewpoints or if they live long enough. But most will live their entire lives expecting some magical force, in this case systemic racism, to trickle down to them and give them the opportunities they expect because they've been told to expect them. So you can't change their minds about a thing that they never really knew wasn't a reality in the first place. I know it's not a reality. I've lived it. So I push harder. I work harder. I recognize that every time I put a resume in it, 99% of the time will come back without any interaction at all. And yet I've grown accustomed to that. And so I push harder and find new ways to find a way into a system or build something of my own that I can use. Those people have not had those muscles tested yet. Thus, they are still sitting around being resentful. You cannot fix them. They have to come to the realization that something is wrong. And all you can do is point out that they've been misled. And maybe they can hear you. Maybe 1%, 2%, 5%, 6% might hear you. The others, all they can hear are the convenient and easy, lazy dog whistling of systemic racism that tells them they deserve and they should have, but we aren't going to do anything to be sure that you get it. But keep fighting for us because it helps us stay rich and powerful. And that's the truth.
Yeah, I think if you go back to, sorry, I dropped off for a minute, but if you go back to that sort of wrinkle cream example, it's almost like, you know, the person would have to buy like every wrinkle cream all the way up to thousands of dollars worth of wrinkle cream and like lose all their money because they spent it all on wrinkle cream before realizing that, wait, maybe buying that wrinkle cream isn't the way to go. But, you know, it's funny because
But, you know, Lisa, the act of buying the wrinkle cream makes them feel a certain. Here's a thought. Maybe it's not. I mean, obviously they want to get rid of the wrinkles, but there is something about the act of buying the wrinkle cream that makes them feel good, even if it doesn't get rid of the wrinkles.
True.
So maybe that's also a place to look. You know.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's like, you know, the feeling.
And that's why they keep buying it, even if it doesn't work, because it feels like they're taking action.
Right. It feels like they're moving. That is interesting. The other thing I was thinking is that there's actually, I went to a running for president, and he's running based on the idea of universal basic income, which is that everyone would get $1,000 a month regardless of whether they worked or not. And he's able to figure out a way to pay for this. And I'm wondering if we need a solution that drastic. Like, this is like not a lie, but it's
but Tom, I lost the call for a second.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that there's a candidate that's running for president in 2020 based on the idea of universal basic income, where everyone gets $1,000 a month, regardless of whether they work or not. And then you can decide to work on top of that to get whatever you want, but your basic needs are taken care of. And that might just be something everyone could get behind. Like, that would be a new way to look at equality without saying the word equality. Is just what you're doing is you're saying everyone gets $1,000 a month. And if you want that $1,000 a month, then you have to agree that everyone's going to get it. And that's the way it's going to work. And so you're really reinventing the economic system, but in a way that's not based on a lie. It's based on an actual event that's going to take place. I mean, maybe we need something that drastic. Like,
the way people would take that apart is that, why should people who don't work or who don't, that because there's always going to be that argument of, some people don't deserve a piece of the pie because they're a certain color, because they're immigrants, because they're this, because they're that. So that's the hump you have to get over is like, this life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and all that is really for everybody. I mean, it's the politics of inclusion versus the politics of exclusion. And, so how do you get that across? I mean, like, I guess if you live in Alaska, you get a check from the state every month because you have a share of the oil revenues or whatever it is. So all Alaskans get their little benefit check. So, how can we translate that to the entire country?
Call it a stewardship fee. Look at society, look at America as a place that needs stewardship. The idea that as a nation, if we do not protect the value of our land, our air, our sea, our water, our food production, our capability to produce, our minds, our humanity, if we do not address this as a thing that needs stewardship, then we will lose it all. And so you pay this and you teach people that it is the stewardship of the future that you are being paid for? How do you participate in making America a better place, a place where it is inclusive, it is wild, it is brilliant, it is capable, it does not stop, it is relentless in its efforts to improve itself. It doesn't discriminate. Discrimination is for the old and the weak who are passing away, who are becoming part of a different era. This new era must include everyone. All minds are equal. Ignore the skin. Look at the mind. The mind is the place we want people to recognize the power of that mind. We all have the same mind. We really do. The mind, the potential is there. It matters that you teach it, you train it, you prepare it. But when you do that, all those minds can blossom. And what we're saying right now is that we are accepting that 60% of our population simply should wallow away and die, having no value, dying, producing nothing, consuming as little or as much as they can barely afford. Is that what we're saying, that that's the best we can do? In light of all the disasters that await the species, the best we can do is wait and huddle in the dark till something comes and eats us? That's what cavemen did. Are we not better than cavemen?
Yeah, I love that thought of a stewardship fee. Like, you are being paid to become stewards of this country. And so you're not just handing out money to people who don't deserve it. You're handing out money to everyone, and you're expecting everyone to rise up. Because
it's an investment. Treat it as an investment. We have no problem bombing other nations into non-existence for 15, 16, 18 years, spending $6 trillion. What if we had invested that $6 trillion into the American civilization as we know it? How much better would we be? I suspect America would be a fantastic place to live. Our roads would work. Our electricity would work. We would have programs set up to teach our children no matter what their issues were. We would have food programs so no one here would be going hungry. We'd be able to build whatever we needed with more advanced concepts around it because we have invested money and time and energy and effort and research to do these things. I'm sorry, $6 trillion is a huge amount of money to spend solely for the purpose of exterminating other people. I'm sorry, I just can't agree with it. And I'm an ex-soldier, so don't act like I'm saying this from a point of view of a tree hugger or someone that doesn't understand the eccentricities of war and the need to protect this, that, or the other. You want to make America great? Make America so great no one would dare bomb it because they completely depend upon it. That's how you make America great. You make America great by being the place that is so amazing people can't wait to get here and don't ever want to leave. That's how you make America great. You make America great by having people be happy, be sane, be healthy, have good relationships, don't die at 50 or 60 due to stress because they're working themselves into the grave in 3 dead-end jobs. That's not how to make America great. You make America great by making it so that people have time for both work and play, and that they have joy and they have happiness. And all of these things are completely attainable. We simply haven't chosen to be bothered, except for the top 1% of us.
No, you just wrote a manifesto for how to make America great. How truly great.
I know, it's really great. It's really great.
Amazing.
So we've gotten a little bit away from the writing piece of it, but I think that it's actually a really good example of, you know, how do you – I think it's actually a great example of the show versus tell. It's like, how do we take something specific and say this is a vision for what the world could look like if we did these really specific things? And you know what? As we do these really specific things, you are going to get paid for these. And you're not going to wait for an abstract concept like the economy is going to get better, which is a really abstract concept and shouldn't be believable. You're going to say, you're going to get a check for $1,000 every month, and all you have to do is to be a citizen of the United States and be a steward for bringing us into the next century. And I think that's really awesome. So it feels like we've just solved. It just feels like we've just solved the problems of the world. We just have to figure out how to get it done. But
and also the element, you know, in what. You were said that the passion with which you're speaking about this, that is something that makes for amazing writing. That ingredient, and there are various ways to achieve it, various ways of craft to achieve it, but a post that reads like a speech, could be really powerful, because people respond to that. People respond to hearing words in a very different way than they do to reading them, and that passion, I think, could go a long way towards influencing people.
I agree. So I am going to actually, we recorded this, which is great. So I'm actually going to post the recording. I'm also going to try and get a transcript of it so that people, depending on whether they'd rather listen or read it or both, can do that.
Lisa, can you direct me to wherever you post that so I can get a copy of it?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
I will. But I thought this was great. Hope to get some more people on this call next week. Tom, I know you're interested in leading one of these, so that would be great. I want to make sure we get enough people so that it's worth your while. But that would be awesome. Let's just keep in touch, and we will figure it out. Thaddeus, always great to have you. Always, I just feel like, that's what I love about both you guys, is you move things forward. You know what I mean? You really help move things forward, and that's wonderful. So thank you. We'll be in touch. Talk to you soon.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. Okay. Bye.